I'm Felicia Shakiba, and this is CPO Playbook, where we solve a business challenge in every episode. Alignment across leadership, investors, and the boardroom is key, especially during and after an acquisition, which is often the difference between exponential growth and an expensive setback. With every investment, the clock starts ticking, and misalignment can cost millions. So how can PE firms ensure cultural, strategic, and leadership alignment from due diligence to the first board meeting and well beyond? Ross Iverson, co-founder and managing partner at Manna Tree Partners, joins us today to break this down. Ross brings a rare blend of operator experience and investor insight, having been a 23-year-old CEO, a management consultant focused on leadership, and now a private equity investor in health and wellness companies. At Manna Tree, he's not only deploying capital, he's architecting alignment that scales companies from 50 million to 200 million and beyond. Let's explore how. Ross, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, this is going to be a great conversation.
I can't wait. So, Ross, just to get started, how did you start in the world of private equity?
Yeah, I think private equity, everybody thinks it's this, Wall Street trade. Essentially, you're coming in and buying companies and improving the value of those companies through expanding revenue, expanding operations. And so I got involved actually running my own business and, having to hire 70 people within a 2-year period of time, building out CapEx investments, and then ultimately selling to a private equity buyer. And I think what it did for me is it really gave me that empathy for what it takes and how hard it is to build a company. And I think a lot of investors that have never sat in the seat maybe think it's a little bit easier. They think it can go faster. And I think the speed can create misalignment. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today.
I like that you've had the perspective on both sides. I think that gives you a competitive edge being in private equity. But it's definitely, like you said, an empathy that you've been able to kind of participate in. So you now have that empathy and greater understanding for those that you buy into. So that's really great. In your unique journey, what did you learn early about leadership that still informs how you build alignment today?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, to be totally honest, when you're 23 years old running a business, it's really hard to lead people that are twice your age. So I think I had to earn my leadership stripes, and that came through just good decision making with kind of the fundamentals of business, which is, you hit your monthly cash flow forecast, you do great marketing tactics. And when revenue grows in a business, you tend to be able to reward your team through promotions, through, more benefits that the company can offer. And it took a few years to get that flywheel going. But then as people were seeing the benefits of growing an organization, I think that's really where I leaned into my leadership of really just promoting the benefits of growth, but doing it at an individual and human level. I think essentially, investors always look at, well, how do we grow the business? And we do these 5-year underwriting models to grow the investment. If you actually look at the people running the business and you can partner with the talent and the management team and say, hey, what does this mean for you as well? And what does this mean for your career advancement? That also creates a different type of alignment that is very powerful in private equity.
Yeah, I think that type of alignment really brings a thread all the way through, which is really exciting. And I want to dig into that a little bit more. So at Manna Tree, your portfolio is packed with health and wellness brands. Why is alignment particularly critical when investing in mission-driven companies?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of success here. I don't think we knew how powerful I would say, the purity of our investment thesis was going to mean as far as people coming to us to want to invest. And, it's one of those things is we partner with a lot of people in private equity, so I'm not going to say any names, but today I woke up to a private equity firm that invests in healthy firms, but they also just invested in a high sugar product, things that would just, maybe you have as an indulgent snack. And what happens is when you meet these founders that build these companies that want to make people healthier, it typically stems from a deep personal passion. They've had health issues themselves. Their parents maybe had health issues. And we always say is they've kind of seen the light. What does it take to live a healthy life? Good nutrition, good activity levels, avoiding toxic products. So when they meet Manna Tree and they say, wait a second, you guys are putting, billions of dollars to work in a category that I believe in. Like that sounds pretty cool. Like I bet you when it comes to making tough decisions in the boardroom, that you're not going to make me change my ingredients just to make
Mm.
an extra 1 percentage point on the gross margin. It's not that we don't care about gross margins. It's just we're going to fight to find it somewhere else in order to preserve the integrity of the business. And that matters when you can match integrity together.
That's interesting. And that's actually very specific to your like your industry. And so, um, I'm interested to see how that translates to other industries, depending on what materials they might use in something else, right? Like maybe a toy that's created. But I feel like it's the same, like it's very similar what you're sharing. And so the mission piece is really important because this is what, this is health and wellness. It's about making people feel good and healthy, and that is a critical piece to it. And so I feel like that mission piece is 10 times more important in your world, but I mean, I could be wrong. I don't know if you've had any other experience in other industries.
Well, I think, some things we can talk about today are sometimes people lean into mission too hard as well, right? Or what they'll use it is they'll use it as a way to cover up maybe poor performance. I think our job is to make sure that we've got, the purity of the mission always at hand. Like in some cases, you can say, there's an empty seat at the boardroom. And that empty seat's going to be by, another stakeholder or one of our customers that is there. That's important. But what we're not going to do is we're not going to say, well, we can let the next 6 months of performance lag, but we're still doing great for the world and great for the planet. You've got to have both. And I think, you mentioned at the opening, our job of taking companies from 50 to 200 million, that changes the odds that these companies will exist for 20 plus years. And if we can't get these companies to exist for 20 plus years, then none of the consumers interacting with these companies are going to get the benefit of what these people built. So I think that, this is a key inflection period. And if you don't get it right from 50 million, there's a better chance that you're going to slowly decline in revenue and you probably won't be around in 10 years. So I think that partnership, and I think to have a partner that can kind of grab your hand in mission, but also look you in the eye. And when you have to make tough decisions is how we try to work with our companies.
We'll be right back. Back to the show. Yeah, fairness is so key. I can't emphasize it enough. And I feel like I could have a whole nother conversation just on fairness and equality and understanding, how we deal with mission, but also making sure that we have our return for investors and so forth. So, but let's talk about due diligence, because I think that this is really, really key here. How do you assess whether the current leadership team can take the company from, say, 80 million to 200 million? How do you assess that in the due diligence phase?
Hey, everybody. Got a quick question for you. Is your job easy, stress-free, and full of rainbows and sunshine every single day? Yeah, I'd say that's a big fat no. Hi, I'm David Noe, host of Speakeasy HR, presented by Payroll Partners, and proud to be part of the Work-Defined community. Take a step down into my Speakeasy live on LinkedIn and YouTube, where we tackle HR and business challenges through raw, uncut, unfiltered conversations. This is HR like you've never heard it before. Bold, real, and full of practical takeaways. Real guests, bold insights, authentic conversations that drive change. Catch every episode on demand through your favorite podcast platform or all the content at speakeasyhr.com.
Yeah, great question. And again, sometimes we have people that are founders that we interact with when we're doing diligence. Sometimes it's founders plus some maybe like one or two C-suite people they've brought in, maybe a CMO or a CFO. And so what you get is you get to assess the whole team and that interaction. One of the things that I love to ask is just, tell me where the gaps are in your C-suite. A big red flag for me is when I hear we don't have any gaps.
Everything's
We've
fine.
figured it out. Exactly. You know,
Right.
and then now with one exception, if I can say, double click and say, well, tell me why you feel that way. And if they come back and say, hey, Ross, like I've got a CMO that built a $400 million brand or a CFO that ran multi divisions across the country at 250 million. And even though me as the founder have never built a $250 million company, I've surrounded myself with people that have. I'll accept that answer. The only other way that I think we'll accept somebody that's not been there and done that is coachability. If somebody has a high level of coachability, and you can test that through personality profile tests, you can test it through communication, you can test it, usually through references are a great way. Then you might say, okay, everybody has to build their first $200 million company the first time. So it's not that we want to exclude those people, but without coachability, it's kind of a non-starter.
I would completely 100% agree with you. I think that I would be okay with working with a leader that has a lot of challenges, but is willing to grow. I mean, those leaders could leapfrog, leaders who are doing great. They could be doing excellent because they're more than willing to take the time to grow and progress. And that curve goes up versus somebody who's complacent, maybe is doing a good job now, but can't have that flexibility to scale. I mean, I kind of look at that as like PE ready leadership. And I think it's something that's it's still important in all leaders, but it's particularly important in a private equity environment. That's just my perspective, though.
Yeah, and when you find leaders that have worked for private equity investors before, they even bring another level. And typically, what they're bringing is communication. They are communicating at a level. They're getting into the clarity in the boardroom. They understand that just because a discussion has been had
Mm.
and people seem to be on board with something, doesn't necessarily mean that it's been voted through or that gives them carte blanche to move forward with making an investment in part of their business. There's a new level of formality that comes when you work with an investor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You mentioned in our previous conversation pre-investment retreats or deep dive meetings. So, what happens during those sessions and how do
Right.
they set the tone for alignment post close?
Yeah, I think we've done this in order to make an investment decision. We've done it after making an investment. I think in general, you're trying to build trust. And what one of the risk levels that investors have is the management team is either partnered with you or they feel like they're in service of you. But and sometimes being in service of you, there's a fear that comes up. Well, we made a mistake. We lost a key account. We lost a key hire. We had some type of legal claim brought against the business. Without the trust or the level setting up front, the transparency can take a year or two to build. That's a high risk for an investor, is if all of a sudden we find out 2 quarters later that
Mm.
they lost a key account. And so some of it is just putting in great governance practices, but there's nothing better than a CEO that just cares about their investor and vice versa, an investor that cares about their CEO, where you get a call on a Friday afternoon and just say, "Hey, like I need to fill you in on something that's going on. I don't know exactly how we're going to solve it, but you need to know, and I want to make sure the next board meeting we can dive into it." And so anyway, those retreats, the way they look like, obviously we're a firm that's based primarily in Colorado and in Minneapolis. And we have a culture of investing in health and outdoors, and so we like to take people out. Sometimes we walk in the wilderness with them for a hike. Sometimes we go on a bike ride. It's amazing when you can get a human connection, how that just builds the human communication, which is super, super important for us.
I love that. I love that you tie in what you do, but also making sure that the values are there. I mean, probably don't want to go on a bike ride with a founder who's, building a fitness or company and doesn't want to go and, take a jog or or a walk,
Right.
right?
Right.
So I love that you've tied that in because I feel like it's something custom to Manna Tree, and how you guys work and you're kind of sharing a piece of your values and making sure that there's an alignment there while also building that trust and connection, which is so critical for that alignment piece. So I really like that idea. I don't think everybody could do that. I don't
Well,
know,
I
but
mean, values, people do these values exercises, they put them up on the wall. I actually don't believe that you should ever tell people what your values are of your firm. Like, if you can't exude the values where people can kind of pick up on it, they don't have to know the word. But I just think it's part of it. One of my favorite examples is one of our CEOs was here in our office, and we've got a gym environment. And I said, hey, you want to go do a workout at lunch? We put two rowing machines across from each other or next to each other. And we rowed for a half an hour in conversation about his business and strategy. And it was amazing. I mean, it was even the first time for me. There was like this kinesthetic like learning going on. But when you get off a rowing machine and you high five a CEO, there's just a different feeling.
I love that. I mean, I would, probably pay money to see that. That's so amazing that you've done that. I think more people should do that, whether they're in fitness or not. But that is something that you're sharing the experience and you're sharing in the conversation, and I feel like it just builds from there. But that's the
Right.
impression that you've shared. So I enjoy hearing about that. But what do you
No,
talk about?
I did tell him though, if I beat him in the rowing, I was going to get a better entry valuation. So there's a little competition as well.
Healthy competition is good. I like
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
What are you talking about in these conversations? Like maybe some bullet points or specific topics that you're like, I always maybe consistently would love to learn X, Y, and Z about this founder or this leader, just to make sure that we're on the same page. What are in those conversations?
I think I like to start with what are they personally going through right now? Because I think what we all forget about is, especially in startups and growth, like when we get them at 50 million in size, they've spent usually 4 to 8 years of their life grinding. And it's hard. And I've done it. I've started multiple companies. Like it's like there's fear. There's, fear of, your personal brand. You're putting yourself out there in your networks. You may be taking a mortgage out on your house to start these businesses. So like I'm really keen on that. And the reason for that is it level sets where maybe the risk tolerance would be. They're either at the point where they got to 50 and they're ready to back off the gas and they don't want to take the risk, or they are loving it so much that they're almost like too hungry and too fast to get to 200 million and they're being reckless. It usually stems with what's in their heart and their head. And so that's really where my questions lie. Like, hey, like, how are you doing? Like, tell me a little bit about this. Like, how many hours a week are you working? Like, is your family taking vacations? Like, how are you taking care of your own health and wellness? And how are your stress levels? That always translates into how they're leading the organization.
I think that's really key. There's so much going on underneath the surface of where they show up at work, right? And a lot of those are motivators or demotivators or signs of desperation or, maybe I just need to make this deal just to get over this hump, but that then they don't know the expectations of being in a PE environment. And but then there's those who have a lot of motivation to take it to that next level and they've taken that much risk and now you know that they're all in and you're all in, right? So that's interesting to kind of tease out, but having those personal conversations on a more realistic level of where you're at, I think probably allow like a better communication channel between the two of you, even, right, more transparency. I've shared my deepest darkest secrets within this rowing hour. I'm more
Right,
likely
right.
to share more with you. Yeah, that makes
Well,
sense.
and there's this natural, like human, like, I don't know if you've heard the quote, like, people don't know how much you know until they know how much you care. I think in private equity, unfortunately, the industry is known as a bunch of people that love to tell people how smart they are. And most of our podcasting and conferences we go to, it's just about trying to one up the academic rigor of, how we're going to perform. But guess what? Like when you look at the top, quartile funds that are out there in the world and who's producing those, um, not a lot of those smart people sometimes on those podcasts are in the top quartile funds. And so you look at like, how do you really produce performance? And I don't really believe in that you have to start with proving how smart you are. And when we do investments with other investment firms and other things, we try to select those partners with people that kind of interact the way we do, that talk the way that we do. And it's very, easy to walk away from another firm to partner when you know that you're going to show up in the boardroom in the first 30 minutes, they just want to hear themselves talk.
Yeah. Once the deal is done, how do you structure onboarding for the C-suite to ensure alignment to intent and execution and incentives? That I think is really important.
Yeah, and I think when we talked before, I don't think we have this perfect yet. I mean, to be totally honest, we get better at this every year. I think where we want to go with it is, again, it's just setting like the communication expectations, the reporting expectations. When do you come to for what? When do we vote on for here? And also, it is baffling to me how many employees, and we have some firms that we do 100% employee ownership to really encourage, people at all levels to participate in the equity growth. But many people don't even know what their equity's worth or how it would be triggered. And so being able to upfront talk through that with them and say, hey, if we can build revenue by this amount and we can get an enterprise valued exit of this is what it means to you. Typically, your CFO is going to know, the CEO is going to know. But beyond that, many of the employees, it's really important to kind of get onboarded because there is a financial incentive. Many of these people that are growing these businesses have done it multiple times. Like there's a defined timeline that's in it. So that's typically a little bit of that onboarding process. And then we've gone back to trying to be more in person for board meetings. During COVID, there was that hybrid world. The in person's amazing. Typically, it's a night before dinner or after meeting lunch. That time is really important to just make sure that we heard what we thought we heard in that meeting.
That's really interesting. I think it's also about making this C-suite kind of making sure that they can handle this new environment, right? When to come to you, how are decisions being made? Is that right?
Yeah, and I think part of it is it's probably better, it's more effort, but the formality of board meeting minutes or action items is super important. That day after sending out, hey, these are decisions that we made. Here's next steps that we made. Here's the ownership of those decisions. It's also a little bit of a trap of board members. Everybody wants to be helpful. Hey, I can do this for you, or I should do this for you. But, as a portfolio manager, we've got, a dozen or so companies at one time that we're managing to. So to make sure that we're also doing our follow up. And, sometimes you get management teams that'll placate the investor. Oh, that's a great idea. Or, oh, I would love that connection, when they really know that it's not that helpful and it shouldn't be a priority. And I think that's also one big thing as an investor is like ladder into your C-suite's priorities. Don't bury them with your priorities. And again, especially I have a hard time with this sometimes just because I've run companies. It's very easy for me to spot some operational benefits, some branding benefits, and really being able to calibrate with what's right for the business is super important.
We'll be right back. Back to the show. Yeah. I mean, it's a struggle, I feel, to not just make those decisions, but those priorities, right? How do you identify the greatest ROI on the top three priorities? How much weight do they each take? What happens when someone disagrees? In a boardroom, I feel like the boardroom is notorious for unclear decisions and missed signals. And so I want to know, how do you run an efficient boardroom with clarity and consensus and real follow through? How do you make that work for those private equity firms who might be struggling with this piece? How do you make that work?
The best board meetings I've been into have been where the CEO has been a master facilitator, where it's almost the CEO's meeting. They do a great job of saying, okay, I've force ranked the agenda. We're talking about the most important things in the first half of the meeting. If we go long, we go long, but they also make sure that there's not an exhaustion of a topic. And again, this goes back to what I said a little bit earlier. You want to respect, especially if you've got 3, 4, 5 investors around the table, let everybody kind of weigh in. I was in a CEO roundtable early in my life that used this thing called Gestalt protocol. I don't know if you've heard of this, but it really links to the fact of like, talk out of direct experience. And so what I really like to do is set the table for, let's say we have a marketing and sales channel discussion, and we've got one investor and one team member on the team that have done this multiple times. If I don't have the experience personally, I don't want to hog the airtime. Let that person talk for the full 30 minutes, and I don't have to pile on. I don't need to make sure my voice has been heard. I can just say, that sounds great. Now, when it comes to, defining like strategic cash flow over the next 3 years, like I want the 30 minutes personally. And I don't want somebody in marketing, sales, and the human talent really, weighing in on things that are irrelevant at that time. So I think it all comes back into either having a great facilitator, and it can be a board member, an investor, but that facilitator has to be the timekeeper as well, and say, hey, like we're not going to get through this topic today. Let's take this offline. We've also used subcommittees as a way to really allow the subcommittee to dive in deeper and punt those board meeting topics offline.
Talk about more about a subcommittee. How many people are in a subcommittee? What does that look like? What type of subcommittees do you have?
Typically we'll have a strategy committee that'll typically be 3 to 4 people on that. The CEO, the core investors, maybe the CFO. We'll typically have some type of nomination governance comp committee. That one is doing the deep dive with the auditors, making sure that the alignment of, any of the equity share incentives are aligned, approving those types of things, so we're not in that minutia. And then it really just depends on if there's another need for the business. So if, a financing committee, if they're out raising capital or raising debt, can be super important for these companies. But it does allow us to kind of disseminate some of the work. And then when it comes time to sell a business, we'll typically have an exit committee formed a year ahead of time to make sure that those conversations can be dealt with in a timely manner.
Awesome. And just for logistical purposes, how long should a board meeting really take, and how many people should be in the room? Or does that change or alter depending?
It depends. I mean, if we're the only investor, it could be shorter. If there's 3 investors, it could be longer. We typically see our half day, 3 to 4 hour meetings. Again, you might have a lunch or dinner before or after, but we're typically not wanting to take specific voting topics into those environments. The subcommittees typically will meet, quarterly or monthly, depending on how, if you're in an active exit, you're meeting on a almost weekly basis. But then we typically will do between board meetings a monthly operating review. That has become a secret for us of really staying in front of the information, dealing with a lot of the smaller topics, and making sure that the board meetings are about 3-year strategy, not necessarily, the current fires that need to be put out.
Yeah, having that balance of here's what we're talking about. We're going to chunk this up. We're going to take care of it, and these are the follow through steps. And then leaving all of that minutia that we really want to talk about in a different meeting where we can focus on that, and not bringing all of those things into into the room at the same time, where it would just get really messy. It sounds like.
For sure, and I don't think I'm giving anything that's like rocket science. I mean, there's plenty of private equity investors that have done this before. I think the nuance of how do you take it from a B plus or an A minus to an A plus meeting comes back to what we talked about before.
Yeah.
The intention of the interaction comes down into like, how well are you prepped? What are the key things? Are there any like the meeting before the meeting, right? Like we've heard that before. Sometimes it's reaching out to the CEO the day before. Again, how are you feeling about the meeting tomorrow? Is there anything that you're worried about? Is there any topic that I could maybe talk to some investors before the meeting to get pre-consensus on that front? That goes a long way. And again, it comes down to that spirit of being helpful. The thing that I think CEOs really get tired of is when the investors come in and they just critique everything. And they come across as critics. And again, it comes down into, for some reason, investing comes down into how do you diligence away all of the risk? I personally, just being an entrepreneur, I want to spend my time talking about the opportunities. Like I don't like the question of what keeps you up at night is such like an old, like templated question. It bugs me. Like that's irrelevant. Like, I mean, it comes out in other ways. Let's spend our time talking about what if we could do this? What if we could unlock this strategic partnership? What if we could build our brand this way? That typically also helps the C-suite stay balanced with not feeling like they're just getting critiqued the entire time.
I want to ask one last question, which I think is the most important question, which is, what is the cost of misalignment? Could it be time? Could it be money or percentage or relationships? What is the cost?
Yeah, I mean, misalignment can come forth in a lot of different ways. It can come into turnover at the top. And, when you have a CEO or a top person leave, all of a sudden you fire up that search firm. They spend 3 to 6 months. You get that new person in. They spend those first 3 to 4 months getting to know the business, getting that retrust. So you're a year out. And so, it's back to the napkin math. I mean, if we're trying to increase enterprise value by 300 million on an asset over 4 or 5 years, that's like $7 million a month of enterprise value creation. And so, you burn up 8, 10, 12 months in a CEO transition, you're talking about a $50 million hit from that. So, you look back of saying, okay, what would it be worth to schedule one day for a retreat going into an investment? What would it be worth instead of jumping on a Zoom, getting on an airplane and taking your CEO out to lunch and making sure that you've got that alignment there, is an example. I think the other thing is just strategic decisions. We're going in this one direction. I can't tell you how many times strategic decisions can get made in a boardroom and nobody follows up on the decision 6 months later.
Right.
Like, hey, we decided to launch this new product. We decided to invest 4 million in marketing against that. 6 months goes by, everybody's looking at the sales data, but rarely people are going back and say, what did we actually anticipate the ROI to be at this point? The investor's just always wanting more, right? And so
Right.
I typically like to ground the decision making. And if there's misalignment in that, you end up taking more risk. And I think as an investor, that's one of the things that we have to do a great job of is managing risk along the way. No business ever performs to its 5-year plan. So it's like, a sailboat, right? Like you have to be really good at tacking, while keeping the end in mind. And I think that misalignment is, you tack in the wrong direction too far. I know you're in the Bay Area, you're out in the wrong bay, right? It's going to take you a long time to get back to where you need to go.
Yeah. Ross, thank you so much for being here. This has been an awesome, incredibly insightful episode. Thank you.
Well, next time you want to go rowing, give me a call.
I will. I
All
will
right.
hit you up on that.
Awesome. Good deal. Thank you so much.
If today's episode captured your interest, please consider sharing it with a friend and leaving a review. To learn more about how CPO Playbook can support you or a leader you know with executive coaching or organizational transformation, visit us at cpoplaybook.com. Your support as a subscriber means the world to us, so thank you for tuning in. I'm Felicia Shakiba. Let's connect on LinkedIn.